Hello and welcome to this video debunking the idea of acid-exclusive or excessive diets. A perfect example of this is the ketogenic diets as pushed by Pete Evans of anti-vax and anti-medicine notoriety. The fundamental idea with these acid diets has been that alkaline or even normal physiological pH facilitates or encourages disease. In other cases, it has been claimed that acids will help in the loss of weight or other diseases. If nothing else, acid diets prove that super progressive alternative knows better than medicine groups can't even keep their own arguments in order. The acid diet is the opposite argument to that made by the alkaline diet proponents. The alkaline diets or detoxes make the same claims as the acid diet, but believe a completely contrarian cause exists. In a small irony, the same arguments regarding the body's regulation of pH and nutrition apply just as readily to consumption of a diet that is meant to make the body more acidic or to be an alternative energy source. Shifting this balance requires actions that are likely to be harmful to health, force mechanisms in the body out of order, or are just plain ineffective. To understand why this is a nonsense argument no matter how you cut it, let's examine an example diet, the keto diet being a perfect study as it ticks all the boxes of its claims and function. This diet requires the reduction of carbohyrates, that is, your starch-rich foods like potato, rice, pasta, and bread, reducing this to an ideal level of less than 50 grams a day. You increase fat and protein intake to accommodate this at a ratio of 1:4 favoring the fats and lipids, which is about 165 grams of fat and 75 grams of protein. This will produce a roughly 2,000 calorie a day intake. As there is a lack of glucose sources, the body needs to find an alternative source of energy. Keto exploits one of these, known as ketogenesis, in which triglycerides are sourced by breaking down body fat. This leads to the production of glycerol and fatty acid chains. The long fatty acid chains are broken down into a variety of ketone bodies, which can be used to fuel biological functions such as energy production. In extreme cases, fatty acids and ketone bodies can lead to an alteration of the blood pH, and this can then affect other parts of the body. It is a condition called ketoacidosis. Ketoacidosis is not good for you. Even at modest levels, the production of ketones is not ideal, with the human body preferring and more effectively using glucose. In some extreme cases of this being used as a treatment in medical terms, blood ketones were elevated 20 to 30-fold. Much like alkaline diets, the acid diets are not going to easily overcome the body's pH regulating mechanisms. The two major roots of this being respiration and the kidneys. The kidneys are a slow process, whilst respiration is a faster process. For more detail on how these two mechanisms and others work to control pH within the body, please see the video linked in the top right and description. The important thing to note with keto diets in particular is that the body will only handle so much fat and protein. The excess will continue through the GI tract and out the other end. The process of digestion leads to the lipids being mixed with everything else, and so the feces will float. Very low carbohydrate diets like the Keto or Atkinson's will have higher rates of side effects, with more frequent constipation, headaches, bad breath, and so on. These in and of themselves are not life-threatening, but they are not desirable either. So far, what's being described should be a series of huge red flags on the use of any diet that is said to be based on an acid or acid production mechanism like keto. It is based on outdated practices. There are known significant risks, particularly with the keto diet. There is a lack of any evidence from use. The side effects, where not medically a problem, are often a big issue for some in social terms, and it directly impacts the consumption of known beneficial foods like whole grains and fresh fruit and vegetables, which then has a carry-on effect to nutrition. Let's address some of the most extreme health claims of these diets. Of these, two are the most egregious. The first is that will cure cancer. The second is that will help with neurological disorders. There is some merit to the idea of reducing carbohydrates, as cancer can be considered a metabolic disease as well as a genetic one. If there is a shift in metabolism that will favor glycolysis, tumor cells will tend to struggle as they rely more heavily on glucose. If there is no glucose available, then they cannot convert anything as readily into ATP. If you were to decrease carbohydrates, it would slow down the process for cancer cells. It would also have an effect on regular cells, but it would bias and favor the function of normal cells. This argument is based on some evidence, but it is poor foundations. Fundamentally, it relied on a brain cancer cell line, and, as you may or may not know, brain cells tend to rely almost exclusively on glucose. It would therefore be logical to assume that taking glucose away from them would have an adverse effect. There are some preclinical experiments, but they are limited, and then there are case reports, which ultimately are sparse, poorly documented, lack detail, and can't be extrapolated to anything beyond what is within the pages of the report itself. If not a huge success with cancer patients, then what of other diseases? Neurological pathologies are the obvious candidate with a long history of use in epilepsy. To begin with, there are reviews on adrenoleukodystrophy. Unfortunately, they have found that despite the evidence available, there is a need for more controlled, large, and long-term studies. There is possibility that the various oils used for this could be effective in preventing symptoms initially, but only for those with an X chromosome-linked version of it. It needs to be done early on before symptoms present, and then will only defer the presentation. The conclusions are about as vague as you can get without directly asking for further funding to justify further research. Yet again, we can go to a review for a summary of its use in epilepsy. There are random controlled trials, and they do show promising results. The problem is they're limited, they have small sizes, and they have almost no evidence of use in adults. This means there is very little evidence to support it, but what is there says that it could be useful for treatment of children with refractory epilepsy, but nothing for adults, as there is often a different mechanism of action and there is little to no evidence of its efficacy. This is good news for children, but for the following issues. Using something like a keto diet will result in gastrointestinal symptoms, an increase in cholesterol, and long-term cardiovascular disease risks. This may have long-term implications for the health of a child. It then becomes a risk versus reward analysis for each child and/or guardian to discuss with their doctor. The keto diet, as an example here, is not without merit. There is a limited use for this diet since the 1920s with childhood epilepsy. In this instance, it can be as good as medications from the same period, but it waned in the early years as more effective anticonvulsants came to market. As part of a balanced and medically prescribed care plan, a keto diet might be of benefit, but the benefit to adults is not there. As we've highlighted in the past, this diet is not perfect and in fact may not help in weight loss or in maintaining your general health. It does have some applications in epilepsy, but not in other conditions or adults. There is some possible evidence of its efficacy in migraines, but this is poorly evidenced. Ultimately, expanding the keto diet as it fits within the larger acid-based diets, and it has little to any use for anyone who is not a child, and prospectively poses further, more complicated health risks in the long term. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.